Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to run down the Marco Polo, which is a representation of a Tier 8 Italian battleship in World of Warships Legends. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders, and then run down the stats with you. Then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you don't want to jump around at all, please check out the time codes in the description. The real short story of this ship's history is that it's a depiction of a Littorio class battleship if it had 16-inch guns. There's actually two ways of thinking about that because the Littorios were once conceptualized as 16-inch battleships early in their design process. Marco Polo is not intended to be that version of this ship. In that case, you'd be looking at a smaller battleship with 3 twin turrets, 2 forward and 1 to the rear, rather than 3 turrets with 3 guns each. Italy largely considered this on the basis that they were a real country and were entitled to build real ships with real guns. While conceptually true, Italy also neither had 16-inch guns nor sufficiently developed plans to build them, and the 16-inch Littorio design quickly fell away in favor of a ship with 9 15-inch guns instead, which at least the Regia Marina had laid a groundwork for during World War I. Also, since those would have been at least as large as almost every battleship in the world, they were more than sufficient and a nice upgrade over the old Conte di Cavour class. In 1938, as the Littorio class was already under construction, Italian designers revisited this idea with the UP-41 design, which was more or less an incremental upgrade over Littorio's under construction. Though you wouldn't see this in game, those designs had marginally increased armor on top of 16-inch guns. Thing is that the Italians still didn't have any 16-inch guns and wouldn't have any for several years. Also, this design not only exceeded treaty limitations, it would have been too large for Italy to build domestically, so this design didn't go anywhere. After taking out the Pugliese torpedo defense system and replacing it with a more traditional layered torpedo defense, this design was farmed out to the Soviet Union. There's not a lot of information available about this in English, as not all that many people speak Italian, and they sent their designs to a regime that was famous for not only secrecy, but routinely murdering people who were able to read. In any case, the Soviet Union decided they preferred to fail to build the Sovietski Soyuz instead, so nothing really came of this design. So this is a paper design overall, and that's all the history that we're going to get today on the Marco Polo. As far as Marco Polo in game, top-down plays almost like you would expect a Roma or Vittorio Veneto to play if it had 16-inch guns. That's less and less true the further you look into it, but for that you're going to have to watch the stats section. The advantages the ship brings to the game are pretty much the standard Italian battleship things, just with larger guns. A 16-inch main battery simply puts you in the right side of 27mm, allowing you to punch through many more cruiser bows. For whatever weaknesses she has, Marco Polo gets around the battlefield very well with good speed and maneuverability, and she can cover those movements with her exhaust smoke consumables, making her a little bit more survivable in the hands of a judicious player. It's also worth mentioning here, though I wouldn't consider this more than an option than a straight up advantage, that you can trade out the HE for SAP on your main battery. As for downsides, one of the more inexplicable changes in the Italian battleship line here is your exchange for a well-armored belt for a paper turtleback. You also pick up some extra HP and AA defense, but overall the Marco Polo is less survivable than Roma or Veneto. Players may also find her reload pretty frustrating. It's a long reload even for 16-inch guns at Tier 7, much less Tier 8, and that's even before you consider putting on the SAP module, which adds another 4 seconds. On top of that, it's also a bit disappointing that there's only an option for HE secondaries, leaving you with kind of the worst of both worlds in terms of armament. There still will be fans of Marco Polo in spite of its many weaknesses, just because it does things other battleships can't. And largely that's going to be stuff that Italian battleships just do. And as far as Marco Polo is concerned, it's just slightly less concerned about good positioning. Probably one of the nicest things about Italian battleships is that you really do have a legitimate choice for what commander you would like to use. The first commander we have is Di Ravel. He offers the best survivability for any of these commanders, but the need for 6 heals may not seem very necessary when you start with 1 extra already. Brawler is a high stakes choice, but quite literally one of the only ways to get your reload with an SAP build to halfway reasonable time, even if it leaves you with a completely unreasonable range. That said, accuracy through volume can work, even if it is unreliable. That said, without a strong secondary battery, a lot of Ravel's advantages are lost on Marco Polo. The other battleship commander is Iachino. He comes with one of the dreamiest base traits in the entire game, helping you to really ruin the day of cruisers and also make those make or break shots against destroyers a bit easier. He's somewhat less useful when targeting battleships and carriers, but no worries there really. He also comes with additional accuracy skills and range that can help Marco Polo engage at the distance where her survivability is less suspect. Downsides here are mostly that you're kneecapping most of Marco Polo's maneuverability characteristics, but you probably do come out above average even with those penalties. If you want to run the base commander, Campione, you're probably doing it either because you want minimum concealment, more uses of your spotter aircraft or smokescreen, and you want the fastest version of the ship possible. It's an odd choice, particularly since all of these tricks are much more doable on Italian cruisers, but fully packed makes a viable option when you already have 4 heals. Other than being kind of crazy, there aren't a lot of downsides here, and it certainly can lean into the Italian battleship strengths, namely consumables, in ways that the battleship commanders really can't, even if it is a bit generic. As we jump into the stats, we'll be looking at the stats of Marco Polo versus the rest of the ships at Tier 8. The stats you'll see on screen are base statistics, with the notable exception of concealment, which includes the camo that comes with the ship. Starting out with survivability, you've got 69,100 hit points, which is about 10% less than your average Tier 8 battleship at the moment. Armor for Marco Polo is listed as 19 to 410 millimeters, and that probably does paint a rosier picture than the rest of the armor model. Most of what we see here is bad news. Though theoretically the UP-41 design had thicker armor, there's really no surface on this ship that is better from a value point of view except for the turret faces. You have 32 millimeters on the bow and stern, 50mm deck amidships, which helps a bit here with HE. Unfortunately, the top of the secondary barbets are functionally unarmored, which is definitely a downgrade from Vittorio Veneto. Your belt has been reduced from 375 plus 40mm of spaced armor to 320 with a 25mm turtleback. This is really peculiar. It's also frustrating because it makes this more vulnerable to plunging fire that penetrates your deck and AP bombs, and there's really nothing that you can do about it other than cross your fingers. One good thing about this is even though this ship sits a lot higher out of the water than Vittorio Veneto, offering a substantially larger target to hit, the Citadel itself is actually lower in the water than the Tier 7 counterparts, but it is overall a much more squishy design in practice. You also have only 31% torpedo protection, which is neither good for the tier or good even for Italian battleships. For artillery, Marco Polo comes with 3x3 16-inch guns arranged in the traditional 2 forward and 1 to the rear configuration. Her big guns have very short range at just 16.7 kilometers, just 100 meters further than the lowest main battery range at the tier. There are 2 configurations for her main battery. Either you have a very long reload of 32 seconds with AP and HE, or a 36-second reload with AP and SAP. With the AP and HE version of the ship, you have 13,050 damage on your main battery guns. Your DPM is about 10% worse than average, but you can overmatch most cruiser bow armor. You'll also end up with a relatively low HE damage over time, and the 36% fire chance will make you an unimpressive fire starter, not that you should be worrying about that too much in a battleship. If you want to use AP and SAP instead, then your DPM is about 20% lower than average, though SAP has the advantage of not losing penetration at range and also having excellent penetration angles. The 14,100 damage here is not likely to score many citadels, except against very lightly armored ships with no layered armor or torpedo bulges protecting their citadel. Mostly this is going to be used to shoot bow and stern, to simply get high damage rolls against relatively well armored targets. But the reload is so long that you're going to have a hard time really going back and forth, except under the most predictable of circumstances, and I've never found any of those. In either configuration, you'll end up with a relatively normalish HE secondary battery that can put out decent fire numbers, but the 90mm will have trouble penning almost everything that they can possibly hit, so unimpressive range and unimpressive damage without those fires. Marco Polo has also a not very impressive AA suite, with just 4 km range and 377 combined damage. Basically, all of these values are a little low, and the amount of AA fire support you provide to nearby allies is unimpressive. Marco Polo's vulnerability from air is certainly not as noticeable as ships like Musashi, and not unexpected given other Italian battleships, but in playing her, she is going to be a more popular target than other battleships for enemy carriers. Maneuverability may be one category where Marco Polo performs really well, sporting an impressive 32 knot speed while also having a relatively tight 860 meter turning circle and a responsive rudder too. For comparison, this sort of handling is closest to the Prince Ruprecht, which puts her in good company as far as maneuverability is concerned at this tier. Finishing off concealment, there's nothing special here. Marco Polo is 100 meters more visible than average by sea, and it's close enough that we could probably call it average. No surprises when firing from smoke, a number which may come up more often in an Italian battleship, but this 15.1 number is very visible, so if you want to make good use of your consumables, you may want to chill with the pew pew for 20 seconds first. Consumables are probably why most of this seems a little underwhelming. Marco Polo, like other high-tier Italian battleships, comes with your standard battleship damage control party. Then you get 4 charges of a relatively ordinary repair party. This can help make up for your low HP total, as long as you can stay in the game long enough to use them. This also frees you up to choose a little bit more openly between commanders. After that, you have an exhaust smoke generator. This is the kind of crawling smoke that allows you to drive around as fast as you want while maintaining concealment. Again, you will have to probably quiet your main battery, but this gives the Marco Polo the ability to charge into a close quarter fray, cap a base in relative peace and quiet, or perform a gamer turn and head for the hills if you've made a terrible mistake. After that, you have the choice between either a fighter aircraft, spotter aircraft, or secondary targeting consumable. The fighter aircraft offers you the best long-term spotting possibilities, particularly from within smoke, though it also works over short islands and can help to offset your poor AA. Probably the most popular choice here is going to be your spotter aircraft though, because without an SAP secondary array and with very questionable armor, it's more likely that Marco Polo is going to spend much of her time at ranges where a bit more accuracy will be quite helpful. Secondary targeting is a choice I wouldn't particularly recommend. Without SAP secondaries, the majority of Italian secondary guns are just laser light shows that don't really do any damage. Also, I'm pretty sure those fancy little 90mm guns are just about the easiest secondaries to take out in the game, so I wouldn't even count on having many of them by the time you really need them. But obviously, this is still your choice. Alright, and with all that out of the way, we'll go ahead and get into some gameplay. We're going to be on Sleeping Giant. I, of course, am going to be in the Marco Polo. And as we load into the game, I'll go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. and I will briefly, maybe not briefly, address the obvious. This doesn't make a lot of sense. And the truth of the matter is that the keen-eyed among you will look at this and be like, Mikawa, that's an interesting choice since he only affects cruiser detectability. And you would be right. Mikawa's not really my second inspiration here. NyQuil is my second inspiration. I believe that this was some sort of game that was played in the midst of a fever dream, and some mistakes were made. Mental shortcuts didn't quite work, and so we end up with kind of a weird thing here. This is still sort of fun. In sober times, I would say that this still gives a good demonstration on two things. One, the weird things that you can do with an Italian battleship, and the second being that really the most important commander is you. That's right, the magic was in you the entire time, just like some sort of after-school special. In any case, everything else on the screen is accurate to what I was using, and most of them are okay ideas, other than Mikawa. We clearly wanted double concealment to see what kind of silly things I could do with this ship. In any case, I don't think that would have been that great of an idea. We're rolling out towards the left. We're going to go ahead and kind of, at first, make sure that we don't get citadeled through the side. If we get spotted early, then we're going to turn in and we're going to go straight for that corner. Now, we do make pretty good speed in this configuration. You can see we're over 34 knots now as a battleship with 16-inch guns. Not exactly bad. I do get spotted here. I decide to let the rest of my team know that. We do have HE loaded just in case we do happen to see a destroyer in the wild. Now, our destroyer obviously pings the outside of this map. There's a good way and a bad way of looking at this. In more reasonable times, I probably would have realized that there's no way that there's a destroyer all the way out there already. But I believe him, as I typically do the people who are on my team. We don't feel bad about having HE loaded at this point. Other than that, we can't really hit anything. We do actually land one good shot on him, but he manages to get 0 damage from it, which is really awesome. It's really awesome to see. Now this Conqueror, I realize as I'm charging forward, I'm actually making my angle worse and worse over time. So I'm going to go ahead, slow down to make sure that we can land big shots into his broadside. He's giving us mostly broadside. And you can see we're going to start to nose in towards A. And as we do that, we're going to continue to aim in towards the Conqueror's belt. It looks like he's going to run into an island. We get a couple of pretty good hits there. We've gotten 36k off of him in 2 volleys, and I'm not going to complain about that. But now we're going to go ahead and run in towards this cap. You can see we're just getting HE'd by everything at this point. That's not exactly surprising. That doesn't look like a great shot. We're kind of looking back and forth. We decide to go high to see if we can get some guns disabled on Conqueror. That'll at least reduce the amount of damage that we're taking. Because you can see everything here is just shooting me incessantly with HE. Marlboro is not angled beyond 45 degrees to me. I would check out up here on the minimap, but I should be able to citadel him at this angle. We get a couple, nothing great. We can get our back guns in though and finish off the job. Marlborough, of course, has a very vulnerable citadel, a little bit more vulnerable than ours, but you can see in this game we're going to protect our citadel more than we do usually when playing ships like the Roma or the Vittorio Veneto. Now, as we see the Wushta moving around the side, we are going to smoke up again. We use our second smoke here basically to allow us to get into A without a contest at this point. And frankly, I'm just kind of tired of being shot by HE at this point. Somebody else can deal with that. And I will continue towards B. For the most part, that smoke isn't really helping anybody who's firing while inside of it, because of course they're all battleships over here. But that's an excellent opportunity to point out that your smoke isn't going to help you that much with 16-inch guns if you're going to shoot inside of it either. So usually you're using that smoke to just kind of get around the battlefield and to maybe provide some cover for judicious players, people who are not going to throw away that bit of extra safety that you can provide them. Unfortunately, we didn't get an opportunity here to get any points off of the cap, but that's okay. It looks like there's an entirely different cap in the middle, that being B, and we're going to go ahead and try to get that. Our excellent maneuverability allows us to get around the battlefield quite a bit faster than most battleships. And as we move up, we will use an additional heal just to kind of top us off in terms of hit points. We don't get every ounce out of that we might want, but when you have this many of them, you can use them a little bit more willy-nilly if you really want to. We're trying to get inside of will to rebuild range for that Yamato. Most people aren't doing silly things like I'm doing in this game and running around with fully packed. But since he is so close, I'm actually kind of thinking I might be able to actually help get him out of this if he wants to quiet up those guns a little bit and we get just a little bit of luck. I'm going to start passing in front of him, and as I do that, I will activate the smoke screen. We've got more torpedoes here than I would like, which is to say more than 0. And unfortunately, he does die. So, you know, in the big game of it's the thought that counts, it really didn't matter. And now we're closing in on this Conqueror. Conqueror's probably going to shoot HE at me. I'm going to go ahead, take some high shots at it again to see if I can't knock out some guns. I'm assuming he'll shoot the one gun that's left at me. And that'll allow me to, again, shoot high, this time a little bit further back. We get mostly superstructure there. If we were another kind of Italian battleship, we would be getting more secondary penetration damage against that Conqueror, just because we'd be shooting SAP, and occasionally it would hit surfaces where it can actually pen. Unfortunately, once again, we don't get an opportunity to actually cap. That is because we kind of charged forward a little bit too far to take advantage of that Conqueror. We did a pretty good job of it overall, but we're not likely to get the cap. It looks like we're backing up just to try. I don't really remember this game all that well, but a lot of this game is instinct at this point. So that was a big failure. We're going to go ahead, throw on the gas again. We'll see if we can't get into the third cap. Usually passing through from B to C, or from C to B for that matter, on this map is a bit dangerous because you're entirely constricted to these choke points. And we don't have a lot of really good information on where each of these battleships are. I'm kind of assuming that they're more or less where we last saw them. That is kind of confirmation of what I was thinking. That is unfortunately not. So it looks like we have the Yamato right in front of us. We are hard spotted now, and I'd like to think that that was a destroyer far, far away, but it's not. It's a destroyer that's right up in my face. And so this is kind of bad. We try to load HE to shoot the destroyer. This isn't going to work because I can't load HE fast enough. So that means that this Yamato is just going to get whatever I can give it. It's actually a pretty good result, close to 9,000 damage. And I'm thinking at this point that I'm a little bit angry and I should just like ram this guy. But then I was like, well, our team was probably going to lose, so we'll demonstrate the maneuverability of this ship, take a little bit of a turn, and we'll just barely miss this guy. Our secondaries are going off everywhere. You can see that they're basically not doing any damage worth talking about. There are a lot of them. They tend to get knocked out pretty easily. The 90 millimeters are basically useless against battleships unless you manage to start a fire. You can kind of see that we're not starting a lot of fires, but as we roll up here, we haven't shot in a little while, and we decide, you know what? The point situation is such that if we can get this cap, we'll be in pretty decent point shape. Even if I'm not going to get this cap, we're still actually slowly ticking upwards because, at least until right about then, we were the only team that had any caps. I do appreciate that I've been given a second smoke screen here because this isn't going to be quite long enough for me to cap the whole base. I think if you calculate cap the whole base plus flight time, it probably was. But, you know, better safe than sorry. We've got just the GK out here, and we're getting towards the end of the match. We're under a minute. A good hit against him, mostly in the superstructure, and he's out of the game. We've now got 120 points, more or less, over the enemy team. I'm going to turn basically to the south here just to make sure that Yamato doesn't get a good shot on me, because the Yamato does have a habit of tearing the Marco Polo to pieces. Maybe not quite as badly as the Marlboro, but it doesn't care about much of the armor on this ship, and certainly from range it has the capacity to do some terrible things with plunging fire to you. So basically we run away from it at the end. We win on points. Winning on points is the same as winning on anything else, because it's a win, I guess. But anyway, closing thoughts on the Marco Polo. It does Italian battleship things. I like the smoke and being able to creep around the battlefield or cap something I otherwise couldn't if I was being shot by guns or dropped by planes. The 16-inch guns also make dealing with cruisers a bit easier since there are few of them that can really bow tank you. That said, it wasn't that long ago that I could take a Roma or a Veneto against the Conqueror or Yamato, and this ship doesn't feel like really an improvement overall. In a lot of cases, it's probably worse, and that's mostly due to its survivability. That's mostly due to its armor scheme specifically. This does come with the option of running with SAP. I kind of think that the SAP build is, God bless you if you have the kind of patience to play that build. The reload on that just feels a bit longer than is really worth it, and you actually end up not having a shell to deal with destroyers even if you want to, because SAP, just like AP, is capped at 10% versus destroyers. So people are going to have different opinions on that, but for me, I just think it kind of takes away from this ship more than adds to it right now. Maybe that gets revised in the future. In any case, those are just my thoughts on Marco Polo. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and as always, I hope you've enjoyed the review. I'll see you on the next one.